What if the most dominant companies in the world are playing a completely different game than everyone else? A game where they don't just compete in the market, they own it. From the raw materials pulled from the earth, to the factory that shapes them, to the software that gives them life, and finally, to the store that sells them directly to you. This isn't just a business strategy. It's the construction of an empire. One that is designed to be almost impossible to compete with. This strategy is called vertical integration. It's the simple, yet incredibly powerful idea that the best way to win is to control every single step of the process. Most companies specialize. They do one thing well and rely on a complex web of suppliers, partners, and distributors to do the rest. But a select few chose a different path. They chose to build a fortress. So how does owning your entire supply chain, from beginning to end, create an almost unbeatable competitive advantage? And why is it a strategy so powerful, yet so risky, that it can either build an empire or lead to its collapse? That is the question we are unlocking today. Our story begins not in Silicon Valley, but in the industrial heartland of early 20th century America. With a man who didn't just want to build a car. He wanted to build the entire world that created it. Henry Ford was obsessed with efficiency. His Model T assembly line had already revolutionized manufacturing. But Ford was frustrated. He was at the mercy of his suppliers. Railroad monopolies charged him exorbitant fees. Steel mills couldn't produce the quality he needed, at the speed he demanded. Every part of his supply chain that he didn't control was a potential point of failure. His solution was one of the most ambitious industrial projects in human history, the Rouge complex in Dearborn, Michigan. It wasn't just a factory. It was a self-contained industrial ecosystem. Ford bought iron ore mines in Minnesota and coal mines in Kentucky. He owned a fleet of ships to transport those raw materials down the Great Lakes, directly to the Rouge. At the complex, his own steel mill would turn the iron ore into steel. His own glass factory would make the windows. His own tire plant would produce the rubber. Every component was made on site. The raw materials would enter one end of the complex, and a finished Model T would roll off the assembly line at the other. It was a perfectly synchronized industrial ballet. This was the ultimate expression of backward vertical integration. Ford had taken control of every input required to build his product. The benefits were enormous. First, cost control. By owning the entire process, Ford eliminated the profit margins of every middleman. He was no longer paying a premium to a steel company or a shipping line. He controlled his costs from the ground up, allowing him to make the Model T affordable for the masses. Second, supply chain security. While his competitors worried about strikes at supplier factories or railroad delays, Ford's supply chain was almost entirely self-sufficient. He had a predictable, uninterrupted flow of materials, allowing his assembly lines to run at maximum speed. Finally, quality control. Ford could ensure every component, from the steel in the frame to the glass in the windshield, met his exacting standards. The Rouge complex was a marvel of the industrial age. But it also revealed the inherent risks of this strategy. The complex was colossally expensive to build and maintain. It made the company massive and rigid. As the auto industry evolved and customer tastes changed, this monolithic structure made it harder for Ford to adapt quickly. This leads us to a more modern and more agile form of the strategy. Let's move from industrial hardware to the world of technology. For decades, computer companies followed a simple model. They would assemble components made by other companies. Intel made the processor. NVIDIA made the graphics card. Microsoft made the operating system. Companies like Dell or HP were master integrators, but they didn't control the core technology inside their boxes. Then, Apple decided to systematically break that model. Apple's vertical integration isn't about owning iron mines. It's about owning the critical components that define the user experience. The most important move was designing its own processors. For years, Apple relied on Intel to power its Mac computers. But in 2020, they announced they would be switching to their own custom-designed chips, the M series. This was a massive strategic pivot. Designing a world-class chip is incredibly difficult and expensive. But it gave Apple an advantage no other PC maker could match. Because Apple now controls both the hardware, the M1 chip, and the software, macOS, they can optimize them for each other in ways that are impossible when you're pairing a Microsoft operating system with an Intel chip. The result was a leap in performance and power efficiency that stunned the industry. MacBooks could now be faster, run longer on a single charge, and remain silent without a fan. Apple applies this philosophy across its entire product line. They design the A-series chips in the iPhone. They write the iOS software. And they control the final point of sale through their own Apple stores. This is a form of balanced vertical integration. They don't make every single screw and capacitor. They outsource the manufacturing to partners like Foxconn. But they have strategically integrated the parts of the value chain that matter most: the core technology, the software, and the customer relationship. This control allows them to create a seamless, unified ecosystem. An iPhone works perfectly with a Mac, which works perfectly with an Apple Watch. This famous walled garden creates high switching costs, making it inconvenient for customers to leave for a competitor. The lesson from Apple is that modern vertical integration isn't about owning everything. It's about owning the right things. But what if you don't start out as a vertically integrated company? What if you are completely dependent on your suppliers? This was the existential crisis that Netflix faced. Netflix began its life as a pure distributor. First, they distributed DVDs for movie studios through the mail. Then, they distributed digital content for those same studios through their streaming service. In both cases, they did not own the product they were selling. They were simply a middleman. Their business was built on licensing deals. They would pay companies like Disney, NBC, and Warner Brothers enormous fees for the rights to stream their movies and TV shows. For a while, this worked. But then, their suppliers became their competitors. Companies like Disney realized they could launch their own streaming service, Disney Plus, and cut out the middleman entirely. Why license The Office to Netflix for hundreds of millions of dollars when you can use it to launch your own service, Peacock? Netflix was in a vulnerable position. Their most popular content could disappear at any moment. Their solution was a massive pivot toward vertical integration. Starting around 2013, with shows like House of Cards, Netflix began to transform itself from a distributor into a producer. They decided they needed to own their own content. This was a move from a forward integration model, where they only controlled distribution, to a balanced model, where they also controlled production. They began spending billions of dollars a year, over $17 billion in 2021 alone, to create a massive library of Netflix originals. The strategy was incredibly risky and expensive. But it was necessary for survival. By owning their content, Netflix gained several key advantages. First, supply security. No one could take Stranger Things or The Crown away from them. Their most valuable assets were now permanently theirs. Second, global rights. When Netflix licenses a show, the rights are often fragmented by country. But when they produce their own show, they own the global rights, allowing them to launch a new series in 190 countries simultaneously. Finally, they created a brand identity. People no longer subscribed to Netflix just to watch old movies. They subscribed for the next big Netflix original. Netflix's journey shows how vertical integration can be a powerful defensive strategy, used to reduce reliance on powerful suppliers and secure a company's future. And that brings us to the core insight. The aha moment. Vertical integration, whether it's Ford's factories, Apple's chips, or Netflix's movies, is not fundamentally about owning things. It is about control. It is the strategic decision to take ownership of the most critical, most valuable, or most vulnerable parts of your business, to build a competitive moat that is nearly impossible for others to cross. The genius of the strategy lies in identifying the choke points in an industry's value chain. A choke point is a stage in the process where a huge amount of value is created, or where a huge amount of risk exists. For Henry Ford, the choke points were the cost and supply of raw materials. So he bought the mines. For Apple, the choke point is the interplay between hardware and software that creates the user experience. So they design their own chips and write their own code. For Netflix, the choke point was the ownership of the content that attracted subscribers. So they became a movie studio. The secret is that these companies aren't just making a product. They are designing the entire system that produces the product. This gives them the power to set their own rules, control their own destiny, and capture value at every single step. They internalize the profits that would have otherwise gone to a dozen other companies in the supply chain. The lesson of vertical integration is a powerful one. It teaches us that in any industry, a company has a fundamental choice: to buy or to build, to rely on others, or to rely on yourself. Choosing to build is expensive, complex, and fraught with risk. It requires immense capital and deep operational expertise. But for those who succeed, the rewards are immense. It's a strategy that creates a powerful flywheel. Owning the process allows for greater efficiency, which leads to higher profits. Those profits can then be reinvested into strengthening that ownership, creating an even more dominant position. In a world of increasing specialization and outsourcing, vertical integration stands as a bold counter-strategy. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful move is not to find your place in the value chain, but to become the value chain itself. If you learn something new, hit the like button and subscribe for more strategy breakdowns. And let us know in the comments, what company's strategy should we unlock next?